wouldn't be the same if you could wake up in the morning and there wasn't a different firmware for the Uboom L. And yes, they've gone and done it again. They got hold of this speaker and they said, we're going to have it tuned by Master Geek, Mr. Oluv or Oluv himself. We can't go wrong. And then it happened. He did tune it. And then he found out the actual production version was not quite like the one he had tuned it on. And he had to tune it again. And he said, can we tune it again? And they said, but we've already got the firmware. And he said, well, but this is the better firmware. And they said, well, the next lot that come in, and in the October edition, then we'll have the firmware. And then it came and it had 0.45. And it was indeed the Oluv tuned. In fact, as they say. What do they say? Because this speaker is all about the man himself. The Master Geek. And if it says it in the marketing, it must be so. There he is. He's in his swimming pool. And he's got not one, he's got 2 Uboom Ls. He's living the life. And do you know what they did? They made another firmware. They called it 0.50. And do you know what they did? They said this one is going to be tuned by a software engineer somewhere in China. I don't know. I think that's what's happened. All we know for sure is they've dumped its tuning. They've dumped its tuning. But do you see what happened? I pulled this off Amazon this morning. They've kept the marketing. It says, trusted audio brand, loved by 10 million people. Tuned by Master Geek, I put my entire effort into offering you a premium sound quality at an affordable price. He put his entire effort into it, and do you know what they did? They got rid of his tuning. It's now on 0.50. Well, if they've done that, they must have something absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to do the frequency response measurements. The most balanced, the deepest bass, the purest high end you've ever heard. Or is it?
In terms of frequency response measurements, firmware 0.5 indoor, 4.5 indoor. Well, the difference is massive in terms of the volume scale. Go about as loud as each other, where 40% is on 0.5, it's miles quieter on 0.45. So the amount of control you have in terms of volume steps is far greater on 0.45 compared to the new EQ 0.50. And the other thing to note, 0.50, look at the bass there, bass hump. You can clearly see it's got more bass, but also look, 60% it's already limiting. So you've got less control over the volume, and at 60% it's already limiting the amount of bass you're going to get. 0.50 outdoor or 5 outdoor. So we've already talked about the difference in control over the volume steps, far greater on the older tuning. And the other thing you notice, we've got more bass on the outdoor mode of the old firmware. We've got less in outdoor. So you could say it looks more like traditional outdoor, where it's just going to be a screech go louder mode, but certainly very different. Get a better look at what's going on. If we overlay them, the difference in volume, 50%, and the extra bass, of course, for 0.50, 60%, and then 80%, you can see we're upper bass stronger, although the volume isn't there. We've still got more upper bass on the old tuning, and 100% we can really see what the headroom is. I have to tell you, my real-world audio recordings are not exactly like this, but in terms of a sine wave sweep, what the speaker does, lots more upper bass for 0.45, but some deeper, say mid bass for 0.50. And then outdoor, you see the difference in bass. The old tuning having lots of bass in so-called outdoor mode. The new tuning going louder, as we know, at the earlier volume steps, but no bass at all really, cut off entirely. 60%, 80%, maximum volume. Maximum volume, they're almost looking very similar. And the drop-off that I get on the 0.45 at the high end, in both indoor and outdoor, when we get to the real-world audio recordings, it's a different result there. Some weird processing going on with the speaker.
Well, some of the quirks remain. The prominent 5 to 7 kilohertz dip, that's obviously hardware, and it's still there. But have they improved the tuning? Well, they've removed the bass from outdoor mode. Hands up if you asked for them to do that.
Not me, not me.
And do you know what else they did? They took indoor mode, where they've clearly put all their effort. He says laughingly, you want more bass after 60%? Well, you're going to have to add a subwoofer, but hang on, there's no subwoofer out. So, bass limits at 60%. That wasn't Oliv's tuning now, was it? He gave us mid bass in the outdoor mode, in replacement of the upper bass for indoor mode. Do you know what the anonymous Chinese software engineer did? He said, well, everybody said, well, not everybody, but he's probably saying more people are saying they would want more bass than are saying we really love the speaker and we love its clarity. And so what they did was they retuned the indoor mode. They have sculpted again the upper bass. They've taken away some of the upper bass you're going to get on Oluv's tuning, and they've given you more mid bass. Well, yes, that's nice, except that it limits at 60%. And hey, we also wanted some of that upper bass, and also you've removed the high end clarity. So they've taken away the sparkle at the high end. They do that, in my opinion, I don't know. They may have just had, I've said it a lot, too many sherbets the night before. I just didn't think it through. But one thing that does when you lessen the high end, it gives it seemingly a bit more of a bass heavy sound because the balance overall has changed. But they've taken away some of the sparkle, and for me, it sounds dull. They've got their feedback, they know what they're doing, but one thing you can't argue with, this is when you normalize, you take away the volume difference because you've hit the outdoor mode. As I said, I really gets on my nerves that they do that. They're fooling you. They've taken you for mugs. They don't know that you're watching this channel. We take away that, so we overlay outdoor mode, indoor mode, 0.50. You see what they've done? All outdoor mode is, it's exactly the same. There's no sculpting at all outside of the bass. And all they've done is, well, it's outdoor mode, we'll reduce some of the bass. I will say some of the differences from that frequency response may be different in my real world testing. We'll get to that again at the end of the video, about an hour and a half down the road. But what you want to know is, what does it sound like? And I'm going to do that now. So we'll start off with the all-important indoor mode because that's the only real mode that they've bothered tuning. So 0.50, not, so 0.50 Chinese software engineer tuned, 0.45. By the way, millions of firmwares knocking them out. I'm going with the firmwares that these are coming with. So I went with the original stock firmware, then 0.45 when that was stock firmware. Now 0.50 is stock firmware. But I'm told Oluv's tuning is, whether it's 42, 43, 45, 48, I believe, was his last actual tuning. But 0.50 is where they said, arrivederci, we're off now. We're going to keep you in the marketing literature. We're going to try and get some sales from your fans on your channel. It's a big channel, but actually the tuning's got nothing to do with you, mate. Sorry about that. Let's have a listen. Indoor mode.
So volume matched indoor mode, of course you have to play 0.50 on a quieter or a lower volume step to get the same amount of volume as on 0.45. And actually, the difference isn't huge. The biggest difference here is we've got a high-end kick on 0.45 that's completely missing on 0.50. At 50% for the 0.45, we're seeing a slight advantage now in the bass for 0.50, but the bigger difference is lack of a high end, along with missing upper bass. By the time you hit 75% for 0.45, which is 60% for 0.50 approximately, it's basically the same story. You have got more bass than 0.50, but it's the cost of upper bass and some high-end clarity.
So we've got the massive volume differences. So one of the things Oluv did was he's tuned it so you've got very granular control over the volume steps. You can play it quite low with real steps all the way up to maximum volume. Whereas with the 0.50, the volume steps is basically out the window. If they basically want 50, they want you to play it about 50, 60%, and that's it. Bass limit's at 60%. So they're putting all their eggs in one basket and they're saying, we're going to sell more speakers by just hitting a sweet spot around 50, 60%, where we probably, maybe most people listening, and they're going to get a bit more bass. They don't want the high end, and they're not bothered about a properly tuned outdoor. And they're going to be quids in, or are they going to roll it back? We don't know. Neither firmware for me is perfect. Certainly prefer Oluv's tuning, but there are certain tracks where 0.50 will be better. Very bright tracks are going to suit 0.50. As always, a lot of it is going to come down to the genres and the type of tracks you are playing. But if you want an all-rounder, an all-genre, especially if you're going to listen to acoustic tracks, stuff like that, 0.50 is going to be a complete waste of time for you. So for overall, the 0.50 for me is dull. You've just got a bit more bass, and that dull high end will make it sound even more bass heavy at the right spot. But as you go up the volume, both of the firmwares will start limiting quite early. It will start getting a bit screechy, and that's where outdoor mode on 0.45 or 0.48, whatever it will be, comes into its own. You get a bit more bass. I think that's a bit weird for an outdoor, but hey, that's where we are. So overall, I would say hands down, I prefer Oluv's tuning. But that's not to say there's no place for 0.50. Maybe that should have been the alternative tuning. Let's have a listen to outdoor modes, 0.50, 0.45. I think we know what the result will be.
my weakness. You know you're my weakness. You got me sleepless. You know you're my weakness. Got me on my knees, yeah. My kryptonite. But you feel so right, girl. You got me sleepless. Begging, barely breathing. My kryptonite. But you feel so right. You know you're my weakness. You know you're my weakness.
There's much more difference between the outdoor modes of these two firmwares compared to the indoor mode. Way more based on the older firmware and overall more V-shaped than the new tuning 0.50. 50% versus 30%, same story, closer, but the same differences at 75%, 60%.
So again, as I already said, first of all, so as far as firmware, 50, I call it 50, 0.50 is ridiculous. As far as firmware goes, 50 is pointless for outdoor mode. Yes, there is an outdoor mode. If you just want less bass, you're absolutely sorted. But if you want an outdoor mode, it's going to have to be Oluv's tuning. That leaves us with headroom. Well, maybe we've got miles more headroom. Well, we've already seen a frequency response. One thing I will say is we'll get to it. It's a little bit different in real-world testing than when you do just remember, not everybody does. Not everybody does the frequency response measurements the same way. But in its purest sense, and what I've done here is a pure sine wave sweep. So each tone is a single tone. It's a sweep, and it's all. It sounds like one thing to your ear, but it's a single tone, single tone, single tone, all the way through the frequency spectrum. The point about that is it's very different when you're playing especially on the cheaper budget speakers. When you're playing all frequencies at around the same time, obviously they're not all the same strength, but frequencies is trying to play multiple frequencies at the same time. It's a very different story, and this will be one of the biggest differences I've seen between a straight frequency response measurement and a real-world listening measurement. Maximum volume.
Comparing the two firmwares, in the real world, the old firmware goes louder, it's got more punch, and the only thing going for the indoor mode is a bit more bass. A bit more bass from, say, 130 Hz down, but at a major cost of upper bass and indeed high-end clarity. Outdoor mode is a little bit closer, but the high-end is very different from my sine wave sweep result. With the sine wave, I'm getting a rapid drop-off at the high-end on 0.45, but in real-world testing, it's the opposite effect. It's got more high-end, considerably, than the 0.50 tuning, which is the opposite of getting what I expected. So if you look at all the results, 0.45, whether it's in outdoor or indoor, goes louder. And the only thing you can really say for the new tuning is they've sculpted a little bit more in the, say, mid-bass, but the cost of high-end clarity and ups. Even on the old firmware, I found it a bit weird that outdoor mode actually has more bass than indoor mode.
So it's been consistent even from when I first started measuring this speaker and to now. I don't know why, but up to 0.45, when I hit maximum volume, and I'm doing that maximum volume test, I get a drop-off, especially in the outdoor mode, at the high end. I can't really explain that, but it's been consistent. And it only does it as you hit maximum volume. Some sort of limiting going on, but with a single tone. But in the real world listening, there isn't a drop-off. You still get that high end. And that's what we see here. And that's why the difference is, there's bigger differences on my real-world testing than on my frequency response measurements. And there's another reason why, at the end of the day, I know it's become the fashion. Look at a frequency. And I'm only doing basically on axis. I know spin-around, all that. You do it on axis, off axis counts and all that. I understand that. But I always said, in the old days, you just listened to a speaker and you either liked it or you didn't. And, you can quite well judge whether it's neutral or not. And it's rarely neutral. Even now when people say, it sounds neutral, I can see it isn't, or I can hear it isn't neutral. But it's what they consider neutral. I mean, define neutral anyway. We can't define it. Do you know why? Because, well, you can, yeah, if it's in an anechoic chamber. No, but it sounds horrible in an anechoic chamber. So I never really, we don't, that's why none of these target responses are on anechoic chamber. They used to be at one time, but we knew it didn't sound nice. Really, so our headphone target response is about recreating the sound of the speaker. And in what environment? That's really what these targets are about. They're not neutral, basically, because it would be an anechoic chamber, and that would sound horrible. I'm getting away from the point again. So where we are. So we've done the active volume test. Can't remember what point I was trying to make. Something about the frequency response. Oh yeah, about why. Here's a real world testing. You hear it with two ears, all frequencies at the same time. It doesn't match up to your sine wave sweeps, even when you're going all round, and then it only translates into the point I was trying to make there. In my personal opinion, I'm not an authority. I'm just a geezer on YouTube. But in my personal opinion, we're now gearing gear, high-end gear, making high-end gear towards gelling with those responses because that's what we're now being told. And you learn, if someone tells you something enough, you begin to believe it. I'm not saying for everybody, and I'm not saying that it's meaningless. It does have a meaning. But it has the most meaning for people who are in properly treated rooms, because those measurements are all about in some sort of standardized listening environment where, let's face it, a few of us here, nobody coming on listening to Bluetooth is listening to the Bluetooth speaker in that environment. They're not meant to be listening in that environment. That's why they're portable. Clue, my channel, wireless, portable Bluetooth speakers. It's not really relevant. Anyway, that's for a drunken night, and it's not for tonight. I don't know why I got into that. Oh, because there was major differences. The biggest differences I've ever seen. In that testing, 0.45 went the loudest. It's, for me, the best tuning. For me, it's the firmware you want to be on. You're going to have to manually go back to that firmware if you buy a speaker now, because it'll come at the moment. How do we know what firmware it's on? You hit your Bluetooth button, you hit your power button, and nothing happens. Oh, and then you turn it off. Let's try again.
0, 5, 0.
That's how you know the firmware. And if you hold it too long, it turns it off. So, for me, 0.45 is the winner all round. I've written down here, 0.45 is far clearer and more balanced, but lacks enough bass weight to satisfy in its indoor mode, especially as you push the volumes. But we've done it multiple times. We'll just go over the specs. You got the point here. For most of you, you will not want 0.50, but there will be some people. Hey, if you're listening in a really reverberant room and stuff like that, and if you're listening in a bathroom with lots of tiles and all that, 0.50 may be the one for you. But it's going to be where you don't want an overly bright sound. Do you know where it's made? It's made in...
It comes from China. China.
About £60, about $72. I know I'm going off Amazon. I know you can get deals. But at that price level, it's very, very, very good value. Is it the Holy Grail? No. As some people would like to tell you, no. But it's very good value. And probably, as good a choice for that price as anything out there. If it's any less than that, it's really, really, really even better value. It's got a decent sized battery for the size, 19.2 watt-hours. Here's the other catch. A lot of people having issues. It defaults to AAC, even on Android. That gets me. It does do SBC. You probably, on Android, want to switch it over to SBC. You'll get a higher bit rate then as well. But I've done my testing on AAC because I guess that's how most... Because, it's all about, for me, how you get that speaker. So that's why the firmware as you get it. and the codec as you get it. But yeah, I think a lot of the issues could well be down to the AAC. It's Bluetooth 5. It does do stereo pairing. It does have a USB-C charging connection. It does have an auxiliary input. You can't use it as a power bank, but you can use it to make phone calls. It's rated at 28 watts. Charging is 5 volts, 3 amps, which is 15 watts. That's, you know, that's pretty reasonable. Most of them out there are 10 watts for pure SBC charging. It weighs just 650 grams. It's a little bit heavier than you may expect, but hey, still very portable. It does float, but it won't float with drivers up. So yes, it's nice that it floats, but drivers down, you won't be able to use it like that. It's IP67. 6 means dust proof. 7 means you can submerge it for 30 minutes in up to 1 meter of water in theory. It's got two 50mm drivers, 2 passive radiators. Here's one of the other kickers, retested on 0.50. Auxiliary input, 185 milliseconds. That tells you how much processing is still going on by the auxiliary input. 185 milliseconds for auxiliary. That's really bad. That's really, really bad. It's got 2 modes, so not just indoor-outdoor, because latency is really poor. Bluetooth latency in music mode and TWS mode is really poor. 400 milliseconds. It's the worst I've ever tested. But it's got a video mode. If you press the Bluetooth button quickly twice, on 0.50 I retested, it's 50 milliseconds. That's very, very good. You know, it's really, really good, and it's really, really bad. So you just know if you go to TWS, you can't use video mode. Video mode. Why do they call it video mode? Well, because it's got the very lowest latency. You won't get the lip sync issues. You know, hello everybody, and then you hear the talking 20 hours later. For 400 milli. I mean, they need applause. How they got 400 milliseconds Bluetooth latency in music mode. There is no app. For a lot of people, that's a kicker, because probably 80% of the disagreements on this speaker is to do with the tuning. If this was Soundcore, half of those arguments wouldn't be. You'd be going in G custom mode, as most of us do on the Soundcore speaker, and you'd be saying, "Well, just use it on custom and listen to how good it can sound for the price." You can't do that with Earfun. There is no app, and I think overall, that's its biggest issue. I understand it costs money to develop an app and keep it going, but that's the kicker. Other Tribit do it now. Soundcore are doing it. JBL laughingly call it an equalizer, but it isn't. But anyway, there's the issue. I think that not having an app was the breaking point, if there is a breaking point for this speaker, because that's really where all the difference is. There clearly is potential in that. There clearly is not perfect, but there clearly is a even better all-round tuning in this speaker. You can see that from the different ways it's been tuned. It's just that it hasn't been given to us in a single mode at this point for some strange reason. So we've come to the end of it. Look, it's only taken me 4 days to put together. I just got to come back to this marketing, innit? Let me have a quick drink. Come back to this marketing. I mean, that's diabolical, isn't it? They're now still trying to get sales off of this guy's channel, and they're telling you it's tuned by him, and it's not. It's only tuned by him if you actually watch YouTube videos like this, and you go out and you actually bother to manually change the firmware yourself, go and research it, download the firmwares. It doesn't tell you anything like that. It just says it's tuned. I put my entire effort into it. It did seem to do that. I'll give him that. The main focus was to provide an honest and natural sound. We could argue about that, but we all have our opinions on that, and in his opinion, that's what he believes it to be. Reproduction in all environments, and there's another issue I would have. Sound changes in every environment. There isn't a perfect sound. It really does depend on the environment. All volume levels, and we know it limits. Indoor mode is tuned towards a smooth, flat response. We know it's not flat, but towards to your ears. I think that's what they should have put in. Your ears will perceive it that way. Outdoor mode gives you that extra bass and clarity. And it's 2 hours later. I'm going to say thank you for watching. I don't know. Probably only my mum left watching now. And therefore I'm going to say thanks for watching, Mum. And I'll see you a bit later.
What the f*** was that?
comes from China, China.
My speaker's got deep bass, balanced mids, and a bright high.
Yes, mine sounds exactly the same.